Lacey, have you ever tapped out in a match? And have you ever got to the point of tapping out and gone, nah, fuck it, I can do another 20 seconds?
It depends on who I'm in there with. But I mean, it's like life. I'm not really much of a tap out person. I mean, obviously in WWE I've had before, but it just depends on the circumstance. It depends on what you're put out there to do. But like you said, life is hard and you don't get to choose what comes to you. The only thing you could choose is how you react to it. And like he said, this is nothing like sports. You know, athletically, you have to be capable of doing a lot of stuff, but it doesn't matter at the end of the day. It's what they want. So you have to have a mentality. And I'm going to go back to what he said, because if you know your why, you know, it'll keep pushing you. It'll keep, you know, right when you want to tap out, no matter what situation you're in life, whether it's a career, whether it's financial, whether it's goal oriented, you're going to find yourself wanting to so bad. But if you honestly, without a shadow of a doubt, know what your why is, that's all, in my opinion. I found myself in that mindset. That's all it takes to keep on going. Because you can't tell me there's not a match I've been in, not a physical pain, not a mental, not emotional that I've ever been in, that I've ever given up. Because when it hurts the most, when I'm the most tired, when I'm second guessing the most, that's when I remind myself, what am I here for? What am I doing this for? And every time it lifts me back up, it moves the pain and I keep on trucking forward.
Really cool example there of being able to like dig in. You said it moves the pain. It doesn't remove the pain. It doesn't get rid of the pain. It just shifts it from the center of your attention to the periphery because something more important is sitting in the middle. I love the way you worded that. And you also, like you mentioned, without any fear or embarrassment, like occasionally, depending on the context, you might tap out. It might be in this situation, I need to be flexible. This isn't as important as this other thing. And that's a really, I mean, how many times, Justin, have you worked with an athlete who's been so fixated on this is how it has to be that you're almost like, yeah, but dude, look, there's a door over there. You're trying to squeeze through this little 2-inch window. There's a whole door open over there.
That is so true. A lot of times people look at a WWE wrestler with their arm being raised at the end of a match or a belt or a World Series championship or a Super Bowl championship, and they see the end result. They see the byproduct, but what they don't see is all of the turmoil and adversity behind the scenes. They don't see the hours of sacrifice. They don't see the lack of sleep. They don't see the financial problems. They don't see the skeletons that, like Lacey mentioned earlier, they don't see any of that. They just see this quote unquote superhuman hero who's the best in the world at what they do. And they don't even consider even all of the L's that this person took up to this point, all of the times they lost, all of the times they failed, all of the times where people who they love, even the people who they love, have not supported them, have turned against them. Like, people don't see that. And people don't see all of the lessons that these athletes and these performers have learned along the way. They're willing to admit, yep, I took an L there. I lost there. I tapped out there. But this is the lesson I learned from that L. Where the average person, they just run and hide and they don't even want to learn from it. They don't want to get better from it. They want to avoid it, know it didn't happen. They want to put their head in the sand. But the elite, they learn from it. They embrace it. They admit it. They say, yeah, I took that L. I'm going to take some more, but I'm going to use it as a stepping stone and not a stumbling block.
Right. And that's a really important point there that I think you notice a lot of people at the top. You mentioned that they learn, they review, they're self-critical, but not in a defeatist way. They're just like, where was that wrong? What could I do better? Right. Now, some very rare few are born with the Michael Jordan gene of just being absolutely obsessed, Kobe Bryant, like that they can't think of anything else. Now, that's not very normal. And for the rest of us who are more normal, none of us are, there's no such thing as normal, but we're more towards the middle of the curve. Often you'll find that people have to actually put in like, here's a trick that I do to make sure that happens. Here's a routine that I use or a process or a ritual that I make sure helps me get better rather than just hoping that I'm consistently evolving and learning. Lacey, is there anything that, particularly as you got into wrestling, right? You said it wasn't a dream. It wasn't like you've been jumping off the top rope since you were 10 and you were practicing all your moves. You would have had to learn a hell of a lot athletically as well as from a performance standpoint. Like, from what period when you signed that first contract to you being a superstar, like how long was that length of time?
The first day I knew I was in trouble because I was not an actress. I was not, I wasn't really even like technically an athlete. I was a Marine. I could shoot a pie just as good as I can, or shoot a weapon just as good as I could bake a pie, But what is that? Like, I can kick some doors down and stop a threat. But now here I am about to have to, get into a character and tell a story. And I'm like, okay. But same thing. I took it just like I took everything the rest of my life. I have this opportunity. No matter how big or small, you look at what you've got, what opportunity that you have, and then you kind of dissect it briefly of what it's going to take to actually accomplish this, right? And that's what I do. I just one thing at a time. I don't care if it's the acting. I don't care if it's interviews like this. I break it down. Okay, here's an opportunity and I'm going to use this as an example. When I got this phone call, okay, I'm going to be able to get on and express mental health and motivation. And that's my passion. That's what I love. Okay, so now, what am I going to talk about? Obviously it's based on what we all come through together, but I take a moment to realize, for one, the opportunity, and then the little steps that it's going to take to get there. And I use that in everything in my life, from WWE to when I wrestling in high school to every job that I've had. Because if you look at anything further, that weight, you make the weight heavier. If you just focus on what it's going to take to get to where you want to go in your why, it makes it so much easier, because it's just like little baby steps.
It down is one of the most important parts of achieving particularly large goals. There's the famous saying of, how do you eat an elephant?
Right.
One bite at a time, right? And it's not necessarily thinking about the next 4 bites. It's, I have this thing on my fork and I'm going to eat that one and swallow it before I move on to the next.
Right.
Justin, is there anything else from a process point of view that you would add to that you find helpful with your cohort, I guess, the people you're working with who are trying to achieve big things, to help them stay in that moment or chunk it down?
Well, what I love is just how Lacey went through her process. I think both of you could agree with this. People always say, what do you teach elite athletes? What do you teach? I might teach them, but for the most thing I do, I just ask questions. They're elite. They've got to this point by themselves doing what they do. And I ask them questions like you just did. Lacey, what do you do? How do you do it? And they're able to articulate, and they'll give you their framework. And then you notice it and you kind of articulate it and you highlight it, and they'll be like, oh, that's what I do. And because sometimes they don't even realize they do it because it's been so organic. And to hear Lacey constantly talk about her why and talk about how she chunks it. And I think that's so important, to focus on the right here, right now. And I think the best in the world, they do things on purpose. What's purpose? It's funny. I've never told Lacey this, but one of the things that I remember when I was watching, I love to observe athletes, observe other athletes. And you just kind of could watch it. And one thing I remember in WWE, it's called bumping. They were bumping. And you see Lacey, like, she studies. Like, when she watches something, you have the average person who's kind of, but then you have people who just kind of like stare and study. They don't just look at it to look at it. They're literally watching to learn. And that's one of the things when in our roles, we're kind of flies on the walls and we could watch. And I remember Lacey, really, it was a tryout. I don't know if you remember this, Lacey, but it was more looking at a tryout. And you're just learning, and you can see your things are going on in your mind. And that's what I see a lot of great athletes do. It's even when they're not in there, they're constantly learning. And
you made the point there. I actually have this saying usually when I'm starting with the performer, whether it's an athlete, whether it's a CEO, a trader, whatever it might be, a surgeon. If they want to sit down and get better at their performance, and they're like, okay, what are you going to teach me? Like, what does this involve? I'm like, I got to be honest. I'm going to teach you like a couple of things. There's not going to be much that I teach you, but you're going to learn a shitload. You're going to learn so much, because this is more about you learning about yourself than it is about me teaching you anything. I can teach you a couple of things about how attention works in the brain, blah, blah, blah. I could tell you stories for days about some of the people I've worked with, but this is much more, getting better is much more a process of you understanding yourself than it is about understanding anything else. And I want, that might be a great way to wrap up with the final question here, Lacey. I want to give you an opportunity. Like, if you could go back to the 19-year-old, 20-year-old who got into the Marines, and obviously you've learned a lot in the time since. You've crushed that challenge. You built a business. You've become a world superstar in a sport you didn't even know existed when that started. I'd be curious to know what you've learned about yourself that you would go back and tell that Marine.
Just live in the moment, because coming from the rough upbringing that I did, I always find myself striving so much to never become what I was surrounded with. And I work so hard every day in order to create a life that is so far from that to what I call, and I use the hashtag break the cycle. And if I could go back, I would tell myself to just breathe and enjoy the moment that I'm an athlete. I'm an elite for a reason because I never stop. I give 100% in everything that I do. It doesn't matter if it's WWE, here on the set with Military Makeover. As a mother, my daughter is literally right next to me in the camper. I've got a little walkie-talkie to make sure she's okay. My husband is fed. He's hydrated. He's out there working. And I take pride in that. But a lot of times I find myself, at the end of the day, just that back to feeling like I kind of can't breathe, and that I just need to realize that we have one life to live, and it is very important to stay motivated, stay driven, but also to realize how beautiful and amazing life is and these opportunities. And because I just go so fast and I work so hard. And then I find myself thinking, man, I might have enjoyed it a little bit more if I could have just relaxed and actually taken it in instead of pushing so hard at everything that I do. Honestly, that would be it, because I believe like mental health is so important. And I find myself at a breaking point a lot of times with everything that I deal with and I struggle with and that I juggle. And I think that would be what I would tell myself.